You ever hear horror stories about drugs and you get really interested, but you obviously don't want to do it to yourself to see what it's like? Me too. So that's why I researched the 7 most disturbing drugs I could find for this video. Let me know if you enjoy this kind of content. It'll be laid back. We're just explaining some drugs and stuff, just like my icebergs. So yeah, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. Follow my Instagram. I have a Patreon with exclusive videos, and join the Discord. Now let's get into this, no wasting time. Imagine a drug so nasty that users end up looking like their limbs are rotting from the inside out. That's crocodile, street slang for desomorphine, a homemade opioid that first showed up in Russia in the early 2000s. When prescription codeine became impossible or too expensive to get, people started raiding pharmacies for over-the-counter cough syrups or codeine tablets. They'd crush those pills, mix them with plain gasoline or paint thinner, throw in some iodine, often straight from pharmacy shelves, and scrape red phosphorus off match strikers. Then they'd add a splash of hydrochloric acid, basically drain cleaner, heat everything up in a rusted pot or dirty sink, and filter the sludge through scraps of cloth. The result wasn't some fancy lab-grade drug, but a brownish-green goo of tar, heavy metals, and acids. At that point, I should just start selling my poop. When you inject that into your veins, you're shooting not just desomorphine, an opioid even stronger and faster acting than regular morphine, but also a cocktail of stuff that'll wreck your blood vessels on contact. Within hours of the first shot, the skin around the injection point starts to burn and turn red. A day or two later, you'll see greenish or brownish patches as tiny blood vessels collapse and tissue begins to die. From there, you're on a one-way track to open sores that fester and leak a foul-smelling pus. Underneath, muscle melts away in a process called necrosis, and if you don't get medical help, and often even if you do, bacterial infections like staph can take over and spread so fast that amputation becomes the only option. I've seen reports from Eastern European clinics showing legs and arms with huge holes where flesh used to be. Sometimes bone is visible. The liver and kidneys get hammered too because they're busy trying to filter out all the toxic junk you just pumped into your bloodstream. Jaundice sets in, urine turns dark, and within weeks you can be looking at acute liver failure or kidney shutdown. Jaundice sets in, why would you even diss John? What did John ever do to you? And then sepsis, where infection floods your bloodstream, becomes a real threat almost immediately. Despite all that, crocodile hooks you hard. Desomorphine crosses into your brain faster than heroin, giving you a rush of euphoria that almost feels worth it at first. But it fades within an hour or two, so users inject over and over, sometimes every 2 or 3 hours, just to dodge the agony of withdrawal. Withdrawal hits fast and furious. Think violent muscle spasms, tremors, vomiting, diarrhea, and an unrelenting craving to stick another needle in your arm. In Russian and Ukrainian hospitals in the late 2000s, doctors estimated that nearly half of regular crocodile users were dead within 2 years of their first hit. That's based on data from harm reduction groups and underfunded clinics, so the real number could be even higher. When you combine brutal tissue damage, organ failure, and insanely painful withdrawal, it's a cycle that traps people long before they can ever get clean. It's really sad. Crocodile's popularity faded a bit as authorities clamped down on over-the-counter codeine sales, putting it behind prescription-only rules. But it never really went away entirely. Whenever heroin supplies dry up or prices spike in poor regions, someone figures out the old bathroom cooking method again. Even today, you'll find small outbreaks in rural parts of Russia and Ukraine, and occasional isolated cases in Western countries when addicts run out of options. Emergency rooms here have seen a handful of crocodile wounds so nasty that they make doctors cringe. Limbs blackened with gangrene, organs on the brink of failure, and infection so deep that no antibiotic can save the patient. Treating crocodile users means intense wound care, scrubbing away dead tissue, broad-spectrum antibiotics, often reconstructive surgery or amputation, and then trying to manage opioid withdrawal while the person's organs struggle to function. Preventing this horror requires more than just stricter drug laws. It means making sure everyone has access to clean, regulated opioids or effective addiction treatments, so they don't feel forced to cook up something from codeine pills and car cleaner. Picture a drug so potent that a single dose can send someone into a frenzied state where they believe they're invincible. tearing off their clothes in freezing weather or flailing wildly at the air. That's the world of bath salts and its cousin, flakka. Synthetic stimulants designed to mimic amphetamines or cocaine, but with chemical tweaks that make them far more unpredictable and dangerous. Bath salts aren't your Epsom salts or lavender soak. They're a class of designer drugs, most commonly made from cathinone derivatives like MDPV or alpha PVP. And alpha PVP is not referring to whenever I go and kill people in Minecraft. Okay, these chemicals originated in clandestine labs in the mid-2000s when chemists started tweaking the cot plant natural stimulant chemical to create new high-strength stimulants that skirted existing drug laws. They'd synthesize one of these cathinones, package it in little foil packets or tiny vials, slap a label on it like bath salts, plant food, or research chemicals, and then sell it in head shops or online, often labeled not for human consumption to avoid legislation. Once ingested, usually by snorting, swallowing, or heating on foil and vaping, these cathinones flood the brain's dopamine and norepinephrine systems. Guys, remember whenever I used to say norepinephrine? You guys remember that? Norepinephrine? That was the old boy. Anyway, unlike cocaine or traditional amphetamines though, which have been studied for decades, MDPV and alpha PVP act with ferocity. Users often describe a surge of energy and euphoria that builds quickly, but within minutes they can spiral into intense agitation, paranoia, and hallucinations. Their heart rate skyrockets, blood pressure spikes, and body temperature can shoot past 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Because cathinones block the reuptake of dopamine far more potently than cocaine, even a small amount can result in a catatonic delirium where users don't recognize family members. They could think they're being chased by imaginary demons, or they hallucinate bugs crawling under their skin. Unlike classic stimulants where the crash comes several hours after, bath salts push users into a terrifying psychotic break almost immediately. Flakka, chemically just a variant of bath salts, rose to infamy in Florida around 2013. Go figure. It's essentially alpha PVP sold under a brand name that sounds like minty candy. Dealers would sell it in little Ziploc baggies or tiny vials of crystalline powder that looks like rock candy. People began ingesting it in all sorts of ways, snorting it, shooting it, or dropping it into a cigarette and smoking it. Even at low doses, sometimes as little as 5 to 10 milligrams, users found themselves stuck in a state of excited delirium where they'd talk nonsensically, rip off clothing in freezing temperatures, or believe they could fly or fight off armies of invisible attackers. Emergency responders described scenes where users tore at their own flesh, ran naked into traffic, or tried to rip their own eyeballs out, convinced they were under siege. There are documented cases of people hyperventilating so badly that they went into respiratory failure or developed rapid muscle breakdown that led to kidney shutdown. In August of 2013, Coral Springs, Broward County police responded to a 19-year-old male who had stripped off his clothes and was running naked into traffic on West Sample Road. Witnesses said he appeared terrified and believed people were chasing him. When officers arrived, he was wildly agitated, screaming and attempting to flee. They had to tase and restrain him. Paramedics found his heart rate at 170 BPM, body temperature at 106 Fahrenheit, and severe muscle rigidity from excited delirium. He received multiple doses of all kinds of drugs en route to the hospital, where blood tests showed muscle decay and acute kidney injury. He was admitted to the ICU for IV fluids, cooling measures, and psychiatric evaluation. These stories made headlines partly because police and medical staff had never seen anything like it. Users didn't respond to typical stimulant overdose protocols, and many required large doses of sedatives to calm down. Behind the lurid news, the chemistry of bath salts is deceptively simple to play with. Kings of clandestine labs figured out that by altering just a few chemical bonds on the cathinone molecule, they could escape the list of controlled substances for months or even years. As soon as one chemical variation got banned, a slightly tweaked cousin would pop up on the market. That means every time law enforcement banned MDPV, chemists introduced a new isomer, alpha PVP, PV9, or N-ethylmorpentilone, each with their own potency and risk profile. Users never really knew which molecule they were buying, so what one person thought was a mild high turned out to be a lethal overdose for someone else. Street tests were unreliable, and forensic toxicologists often had to send samples off to specialized labs for gas chromatography mass spectrometry to identify the exact compound. In practice, many bath salt vials contained a mix of several cathinones, plus cutting agents like talcum powder or even caffeine, making the effects even more unpredictable. The medical toll was staggering. From 2010 to 2014, poison control centers in the US reported tens of thousands of bath salt-related calls. Hospitals in major cities, Miami, New York, Chicago, saw clusters of excited delirium cases that baffled doctors. Patients who weren't responding to naloxone because they weren't opioid users, and wouldn't calm down no matter how much sedation they got. In Florida alone, the number of alpha PvP cases spiked so badly that sheriffs eventually banned Flocka by name, adding it to the state's Schedule 1 list. That crackdown pushed labs to move to other states or overseas, but nearby regions kept seeing ripple effects. Emergency rooms in Georgia and Alabama reported similar psychosis cases. As word spread, some users even started referring to it as zombie drug, though that moniker was always a bit misleading. Yeah, people sometimes behaved like feral animals, but it was more a violent psychotic break than a mindless undead shuffle. Long-term bath salts users faced a brutal cycle of addiction. Unlike meth or cocaine where the high lasts a few hours, alpha PvP crashes in under an hour, leaving users with crushing depression, crippling anxiety, and an almost irresistible urge to dose again. Younger addict demographics popped up. High school kids experimenting at parties, college students buying it online because it was legal for a while, homeless populations chasing affordable highs. Psychiatrists noted that extended use led to lingering psychosis even after a month of sobriety. People hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there, or believing they were immortal soldiers on a secret mission. Cognitive tests on chronic users revealed severe memory deficits and impaired decision-making. It wasn't just the initial overdose risk. Even those who survived without organ failure often had brains rewired by months or weeks of pure madness. Treatment required a unique approach. First responders learned to assume that any agitated, delusional patient who wouldn't respond to benzos might be on bath salts. They had to carry extra doses of antipsychotics like ketamine just to sedate someone enough to get IV lines in. Once hospitalized, patients were monitored. Doctors would run tests for creatine kinase levels to catch muscle breakdown early and administer aggressive IV fluids to protect kidneys. Psychiatric evaluation was critical. Even when the body was stabilized, the mind often remained locked in paranoid delusions requiring inpatient mental health care. As soon as physical safety was assured, many hospitals put patients on SSRIs or atypical antipsychotics to manage lingering psychotic symptoms. Some rehab centers developed specialized tracks for stimulant psychosis where group therapy focused on understanding how the drugs rewired their brains, and learning coping strategies for anxiety and paranoia without medication. Legally, as of 2025, most major synthetic cathinones are controlled at the federal level in the US, which thank God. Online purchase routes remain a problem though. While international shipping of cathinones has become riskier, small darknet vendors still list research chemicals that end up in head shops or knockoff convenience stores. Public health experts keep warning that the next bath salts could be even nastier. Imagine a cathinone 50 times as potent as alpha PvP that also carries a neurotoxic additive causing permanent brain damage. That scenario isn't entirely fantasy. It's exactly what happens when chemists tweak molecular structures without any safety testing. Harm reduction efforts have grown too. Needle exchange programs hand out pamphlets warning if someone stops moving, feels overheated, or rips off clothes in cold weather, call 911, it's not a prank. Community outreach groups in Florida and Texas run ad campaigns showing blurred images of bath salt deaths with captions like "this could be you." Some harm reduction centers offer free saliva test kits, though they can't detect everything, so users at least know if they're about to snort MDPV or something even worse. Mental health hotlines also began offering specialized counseling for stimulant users, an acknowledgement that surviving one psychotic episode doesn't heal the brain's trauma. All told, bath salts and Flocka remain cautionary tales about the perils of designer drugs. They emerged out of legal loopholes and desperation. Someone always wants a cheap high, and chemists are always going to be there to deliver it. It's very scary. Picture a tiny seed from a pretty flowering plant turning you into a puppet with zero memory of what just happened. That's what scopolamine can do. In low controlled doses, it's used in patches or pills to prevent motion sickness or post-operative nausea by blocking muscarinic acetylcholine receptors in your brain. But in parts of Colombia, particularly Bogota, criminals grind seeds from Jimson weed, or angel's trumpets, into a fine powder. They'll sprinkle it into drinks, coat cigarettes, even dust ATM keypads. Once you unknowingly absorb a few milligrams, the drug kicks in within 10 to 20 minutes. Your pupils dilate, your mouth goes bone dry, and you feel groggy and confused. Then comes the memory wipe. While you're still awake and able to walk or talk, you can't form new memories. Victims report waking up hours later in strange places, pockets emptied, wallets gone. Now this one I remember from that one episode of White Collar. Do y'all watch that show? Or is that like a show no one watches? I don't know. But there's an episode where they use this shit. Anyway. Colombian hospital records from the early 2000s show scopolamine in roughly 10 to 15% of admitted poisoning cases, and local NGOs estimate upward of 40,000 incidents a year. Most underreported because victims often don't realize they've been dosed until hours later. The US Embassy in Bogota has issued traveler advisories warning that even sharing a cigarette or accepting a drink from someone you've just met carries risks. Scopolamine's effects can last 24 to 48 hours, depending on the dose. During that hour, you're a suggestible sleepwalker, able to be guided into an ATM, forced to withdraw cash, or even coerced into handing over valuables, all without conscious resistance or later recall. When you finally snap out of it, you're left with a haze. Fragments of images, but no coherent story of what went down. Because it's so potent and easy to source, the plants grow wild. Law enforcement struggles to contain it. There are no quick roadside tests for scopolamine the way there are for alcohol or many other drugs. Forensic labs confirm it through mass spectrometry of blood or gastric samples, but by then, the victim's clean slate of memory makes witness statements unreliable. Public health efforts in Colombia now focus on educating vendors and travelers. Don't let anyone handle your drink, watch your back at ATMs, and never leave your belongings, even momentarily, with a stranger. Jenkem is more urban legend than widespread reality, but the idea is unsettling enough. Ferment human waste in a sealed container until gases like methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia build up, then inhale that stinky brew through a straw for a hallucinogenic buzz. The first reports came from Lusaka, Zambia in the mid-1990s, where street children were said to scoop sewage from pit latrines into buckets and claim vivid hallucinations, like flying after huffing the fumes. An Inner Press Service story in 1995 quoted local outreach workers who described Jenkem as more potent than glue sniffing. However, follow-up investigations by health authorities and NGOs never turned up large-scale evidence. A 2007 US law enforcement bulletin warning of teenage Jenkem use was later debunked by both the DEA and Snopes.com. They found no confirmed US cases and no peer-reviewed studies documenting more than a handful of anecdotal reports. Unlike inhalants such as toluene or N-butane, where we have clear toxicology literature, Jenkem remains just that folklore. It's gross, yeah, and it's funny, yeah. It might give a fleeting high because of oxygen deprivation combined with inhaled gases, but there's zero solid data on long-term effects, prevalence, or hospital admissions. But don't try it! Don't do it. I see you. Get your hand out of that toilet, buddy. I see you. You think you're slick. Don't, put that straw down. You've heard the dentist crack open a light bulb and say, "Here comes the giggle gas." But dude, guys, I swear, sometimes when I write my scripts, I just fuck around. Dude, why did I write that? Okay. But recreational whippets, the whipped cream chargers filled with N2O, can be more dangerous than you think. Nitrous oxide works by briefly blocking NMDA receptors in your brain, giving a 30 to 60 second rush of euphoria, lightheartedness, and laughter. Because it's cheap and legal to buy for culinary or industrial use, it's become popular at clubs and parties. According to the 2021 Global Drug Survey, lifetime nitrous use rates exceed 20% in countries like the UK, Australia, and Canada, and emergency departments in urban centers report rising cases of neurological damage linked to heavy use. The core risk isn't an instant overdose, but cumulative damage. N2O inactivates vitamin B12 by oxidizing the cobalt ion at its center. B12 is crucial for maintaining a bunch of shit around like your nerve fibers. Basically, without it, you could develop combined degeneration of the spinal cord. Clinically, patients show tingling or numbness in their hands and feet, unsteady gait, weakness, and sometimes cognitive impairment. MRI scans typically reveal high signal changes in the posterior columns of the cervical spinal cord. Case reports document users, often in their late teens or early 20s, who binge on dozens of whippets over a weekend, then wake up weeks later with trouble walking and lose proprioception. Treatments require high-dose intramuscular B12 injections, usually 1,000 UG daily for a week. Micrograms a week, daily plus physical therapy. Recovery can take months, and some deficits, like subtle gait abnormalities, may never fully resolve. There's also the asphyxia angle. When you inhale pure nitrous without enough oxygen, you risk hypoxic blackout. Hypoxic blackout, my fault guys. Several fatalities have been attributed to people passing out mid-inhalation, falling and suffocating. Plus, booby trap jokes aside, compressed gas can cause barotrauma, lung injury, if sprayed directly into the mouth at close range. So next time you see whippets at a party, remember that the fun is fleeting, but the nerve damage and potential long-term spinal injury is not fleeting. Those are very real. In 1982, a handful of young drug users in California tried to cook an experimental opioid called MPPP. Due to a lab error, their batch was contaminated with MPTP, a byproduct that looks innocuous but selectively destroys dopamine neurons in the brain. Within days of injecting it, users developed severe Parkinsonism. They froze mid-step, their faces went mask-like, and they trembled so violently they couldn't even feed themselves. One patient later told researchers he felt as though his mind was trapped in a body turned to stone. That cluster of cases became the first human clear evidence that environmental toxins could cause Parkinson's disease, and MPTP entered neurology textbooks as the compound that induced frozen addict syndrome overnight. None of those patients recovered their normal motor function. Some improved partially with L-DOPA treatment, but all retained lasting disabilities. Slowed movement, rigidity, and tremor. To this day, MPTP remains a pretty critical research tool for Parkinson's. Okay, next up is PCP angel dust / finclidine. You should have find it. Finclidine. Finclidine. Yeah, finclidine. Imagine taking what was once an experimental surgical anesthetic, one that makes you feel completely cut off from your body and reality, and smoking it like a joint. That's PCP. First synthesized in 1956 as a dissociative anesthetic, it was briefly used in human surgeries under the name Cernil before doctors noticed patients experiencing delirium, hallucinations, and alarmingly violent outbursts upon wakening. By the early 70s, it was pulled from medical use, but that same dissociative floating outside your body effect made it irresistible to the underground. Street PCP usually comes as a white crystalline powder or liquid, often sprayed onto leafy material, sold as angel dust, or dabbed onto mint, oregano, or marijuana buds. A single toke can send your brain into shutdown mode. Blood pressure and heart rate spike, you lose pain perception entirely, and your thoughts fragment into paranoid delusions. Your pupils dilate so wide they look like saucers, and your eyes might jerk back and forth rapidly. Emergency departments in the 1970s and 80s reported clusters of PCP-related injuries that still read like action movie scripts. One case out of Los Angeles in 1978 involved a man found standing on a freeway overpass ripping his clothes off because he believed they were on fire. He later told paramedics that he thought his skin was melting. Medics gave him massive doses of diazepam to calm his agitation and cooled him with ice packs. In New York City around the same time, hospitals saw patients who'd been stabbed or shot in fights they didn't remember. PCP's combination of numbness, super strength, and violent psychosis meant people would attack officers or loved ones before collapsing from exhaustion days later. Long-term users often spiral into chronic psychosis indistinguishable from schizophrenia. Auditory hallucinations, disorganized speech, catatonic postures. Unlike amphetamine or cocaine crashes, PCP crashes can linger for weeks, with survivors describing nights of pacing their apartment convinced everybody outside was plotting to kill them. Treatment is purely supportive. High-dose benzos or antipsychotics to manage agitation, IV fluids for hypertension, and hours, sometimes days, of supervision until the drug washes out. Because PCP also suppresses pain, many users arrive at the ER with severe burns, cuts, or fractures they inflicted on themselves, oblivious of which until the drug fades. Even today, when a rodenticide or fentanyl analog can grab headlines, PCP remains uniquely terrifying. You can't taste it, you can't smell it once it's laced on plant material, and a single hit can trigger a descent into hallucinations and aggression that no standard overdose protocol can fully reverse. Unlike natural cannabis, which contains THC and dozens of other cannabinoids that have been studied for decades, these synthetic versions we're going to talk about now are lab-made molecules. Some originally designed in university research labs to study cannabinoid receptors, others concocted in clandestine labs to dodge drug laws. They're sprayed onto inert plant material, think bagged herbal mixes that look like potpourri, and sold in gas stations, smoke shops, or online as not for human consumption. Once you light up, you have no idea which chemical you're ingesting, how potent it is, or what toxic additives might be lurking in that green smell-good dust. The saga begins in the 1990s when academic chemists first synthesized compounds like JWH18, CP47497, and HU210 to understand how cannabinoid receptors function. These early molecules turned out to be far more potent agonists of CB1 receptors than THC, some up to 100 times stronger. Pharmaceutical companies explored using them for pain relief or appetite stimulation, but side effects, severe anxiety, psychosis, and cardiovascular strain derailed these clinical trials. Fast forward to the mid-2000s. Underground chemists, always watching academic journals, saw an opportunity. They started ordering tiny quantities of JWH18 and similar compounds from overseas chemical suppliers, or synthesizing them in home labs. Once you spray a few milligrams of JWH18 per gram of plant material, that bag of spice becomes a legal high in many countries, at least for a while, because drug laws were typically written to ban specific compounds, not entire classes. Early users thought it was just a clever substitute for pot. It burned like weed, smelled vaguely herbal, and produced a brief buzz. But that buzz could flip into terror in a matter of minutes. Unlike natural THC, which is a partial agonist at CB1 receptors and produces milder effects even at high doses, synthetic cannabinoids are full agonists. That means they flood the brain's CB1 receptors, overactivating them in a way that can sap motor control, scramble cognitive processing, and exacerbate anxiety or paranoia. Within minutes to an hour, some users report racing heart, skyrocketing blood pressure, and a panicked sense of doom, like the fabric of reality is unraveling. Others go numb, lose coordination, and start vomiting uncontrollably. Some experience seizures. Others slip into comas fast enough that it's reminiscent of opioid overdose. Except naloxone, an opioid antidote, does nothing to help. The real horror stories emerged around 2010 to 2012 when North American poison control centers began logging thousands of calls about spice overdoses. Hospitals in New York, Georgia, and Missouri saw clusters of patients showing up in psychotic states. Why are these drugs so unpredictable? First, the dosing. A few milligrams can be enough to trigger a psychotic break. When a lab makes JWH18, they often measure by weight, but when they mix it with plant material, that precision goes out the window. Some batches might have 1 milligram of active chemical per gram of plant, others 50 milligrams per gram. Second, the chemical variety. Once one molecule gets banned, chemists tweak the molecular structure by adding a fluorine atom here, or swapping a methyl group there, and then label it with a new acronym. Those tiny tweaks can change how long the compound binds to receptors, how toxic it is to organs, or how quickly the body breaks it down. Third, the additives. Some manufacturers use solvents laced with metal impurities. Others use random cutting agents like caffeine, talc, or bleach to make the mixture look fuller. The result is a legal, potent cocktail where you're playing roulette with your heart, brain, and kidneys. Tolerance and addiction evolve fast. Natural THC users sometimes build tolerance over months or years. With synthetic cannabinoids, the full agonist effect pushes dopamine surges so hard that within a few days, users need to smoke constantly just to feel normal. Withdrawal can be brutal. Insomnia, uncontrollable tremors, sweating, diarrhea, intense irritability, and crushing anxiety. Similar to a high-dose synthetic opiate detox, but with more cognitive symptoms. Some users overdose repeatedly because they're chasing a calm high that never comes. Each new batch promises a smooth buzz, but they end up feeling perpetual terror. Regulation has tried to keep pace, but it's a classic whack-a-mole. In the US, the Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act of 2012 banned dozens of specific molecules. The DEA followed up with emergency scheduling for some and new analogs as they surfaced. Yet, labs overseas in China, India, or Eastern Europe continue pumping out novel analogs, sometimes hundreds at a time, selling tiny grams online for a few dollars a piece. Border agents seize shipments, but when one compound gets banned, 5 more variations flood the market. Canada and the UK implemented blanket bans on entire classes, but underground chemists still find loopholes by just shifting just enough of the molecule structure to claim that it's new. Harm reduction is tough. Needle exchange programs don't help when people smoke joints. Pill testers don't work because there are no pills, and saliva strips can't detect the latest analog. Some community outreach groups distribute brochures with general advice. For example, start with 1 puff, wait 15 minutes. Avoid mixing with alcohol or other stimulants. If you experience chest pain or severe anxiety, call 911 immediately. But even that has limited impact when users are chasing a legal high. Psychiatric clinics often describe these patients as some of the hardest to manage. They arrive delusional, sometimes hyperthermic, which is when their temperature is over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and they require massive doses of antipsychotics, benzos, or even ketamine for sedation. Intensive cooling measures and IV fluids become medical priorities before mental stabilization, and if they survive that night, they'll often need weeks of inpatient psychiatric care to recover from acute psychosis.